Hey guys, Coach here. Welcome to the land of Dorothy and Toto. We're out in Kansas in the United States, and we have before us the single biggest irrigation design that I have ever touched. We're talking over 10 acres of land. We're talking about 2 large ponds, one to draw from and one to refill the one that we're going to draw from. We're going to talk about variable speed pump installations. We're going to talk about areas and sections and groups and zones. This is a massive one. I'm glad you're here. Let's get underway, shall we? First off, let me start off this video with a huge thank you to Roger and his lovely wife, Jolinda. This subscriber and now customer, and whom I consider a new friend, reached out to me back in September. He contacted me after doing some research on an irrigation system that he plans on doing himself, an irrigation system of a grand scale. You know, Roger is the epitome of a DIYer and is in the process of completing a 2-pond water source irrigation project slated to be completed by probably this time next year. This is a massive project. This is a project similar to irrigating a new golf course type of thing. The water source that is consistent is a 3-acre spring-fed pond that Roger has enlarged from its original size and is the main water source for this entire project. He'll be installing a large suction pump in an enclosure down at this lower pond and drawing water by the means of a massive pump up a 4-inch pipe and topping off and keeping full a smaller pond up above a dam. Now, this second pond is the main water source for the irrigation system, and it's probably about, I would say, a 1/2 acre in size, maybe slightly less. But with a lot of site work that has been done over the past year or so, this pond has been deepened and enlarged as well. So it's huge, and it'll be probably at maximum pool about 9 to 10 feet deep. Now, these ponds also have recreational purposes too. They will be stocked with fish. They will have a dock on it. The lower pond is going to have an outdoor living area adjacent to the pump house where you could recreate and take a canoe or a kayak or swim in the pond in the warmer months. So it has a multi-purpose. The upper pond, the irrigation system drawing pond, it too will have a small deck, and it too will be stocked with fish. And so there's a lot of thought that's gone into this, which in a nutshell really describes Roger to a T. I mean, he thinks things out down to the minutia, shall we say. So Roger reached out and wanted to know if I was willing or wanted to take on the design portion of this irrigation system. And we originally chatted by email a couple of times, and then we scheduled our first phone appointment. That phone appointment lasted about 2.5 hours as our initial conversation. These conversations, which totaled about 3, centered around the project, yes, but also around each other as men and as businessmen. As any good consumer and business person, trust needs to be established on both sides before committing to hiring me or me working for him. And so a total of about 5 hours of conversation went on. And I learned a lot about him and the project, learned about his family and the location, learned about his business, and I told him some of my history as well. So, after all of that, he trusted me enough to say, hey, would you submit an estimate, a proposal to me? And I did. And it was accepted. And this is not your down the street and around the corner type of project. This is something where Maestro and I had to drive about 180 miles to the local regional airport, catch a flight out of there and fly to Illinois, catch a connector and fly to Kansas City, and then drive and get all set up for at least a week's worth of work. It was certainly not, and I understood this very early on in the conversations with Roger, it's not something that I could have done from Google Earth. You literally had to be on the ground to see the topography and see the situation at hand. Not only that, but it was way too large and so many challenges as a designer that you just had to be there. And so I was facing, once I saw what I had committed to, and let me tell you, it was going to be a challenge. The involved space was around 10 acres, plus or minus. It included a residential area around the home and the pool that was going in at the time, backyard, front yard, side yards, etc. And 95% huge turf area, huge, probably 9.85 acres of turf. The main challenges that I faced was the elevation and the fact that it was not going to be drawn from a municipal system or a well system. This was going to be drawn from a natural source system in the form of those two ponds. Both of these ponds sat much lower on the property than much of the irrigated area that was going to be designed out. The lower pond was down in a bottomland farm field type of area and had been enlarged by Roger hiring and outsourcing to a site work contractor. Went from about an acre, acre and a half to 3 acres. And dams and other things that were brought into this so that the system would be viable, because the amount of water that was going to be used to irrigate this property was huge. I mean, it was going to be a lot of water, and it had to be reliable water. The other thing, as I mentioned, the elevation is not what I expected when I thought of Kansas here in the US. Most people who are not from Kansas or the Midwest think about the Wizard of Oz. Think about flat grasslands and farmlands and farm fields that stretch to the horizon. That was not the case here. Yes, there were some fields down in the bottomland, the floodplain that was extended well out into Roger's 70 total acres of property. But where the project was going to be was perched up on top of a hilltop, which overlooked all this area, which was beautiful to see. I'd love to see it in the springtime. But we're talking elevations from lower pond to upper pond of about 30 feet difference in elevation, going up the face of a newly constructed earth dam, and an earth dam that was probably about 1,200 feet long. So yeah, this was not your typical backyard irrigation project, not in any way, shape, or form. And as far as flat, nope, not in any way, shape, or form either. When Maestro and I flew out there, we flew out on a Sunday, and we arrived late that Sunday night, and we're talking midnight. And that's when some of the challenges and logistical hiccups started for us in this week of being on the road. We had booked a hotel, we had rented a car, we had reserved flights to and from. Car was no problem. Flights were no problem. Lodging, yeah, that was a problem. And I'm not going to go out into a litigious area in this story, but just suffice it to say that a booking system that is online that starts with a P will never, ever be used again. Ever. It was a horrible experience. We drove up to a hotel that was actually closed for renovation, not even open to the public. Had to scramble at 12:30 in the morning to find and only one last room in the whole town Then to come to find out when we got reassigned another hotel that it was basically one step above a flop house and former drug hangout. So those logistical nightmares aside, thanks to Airbnb, who came through with a one-bedroom house in the town we were working in, and the rest of the week went much, much smoother. But back on the project itself. When we arrived, I was provided a tour and a side-by-side by Roger. Wonderful man, wonderful, cordial, humble man that's done very well for himself and his business and his family. And we drove around this 10-acre parcel, and I realized a lot of the challenges ahead of me pretty quickly on. Single-handedly, the largest irrigation project, design project I've ever done, that I've ever had to do. We were talking about huge, high-voltage pumps, lifting pumps, that would pull water from one pond and fill another pond. We're talking from that upper pond, more elevation gain that went up to other areas like the front yard and stuff. That was another 25 feet of elevation gain. And then you had elevation loss. Once you got up on top, you had to irrigate turf areas that dropped back off this hilltop down to roads and woodlots, etc. We're talking involving 2 pumps that run on 480 volt 3-phase 60 hertz power, plus the elevation change, and what ended up being around 600 individual sprinkler heads to service the affected project area. So at the end of this 1-hour tour, unlike Gilligan's Island, the SS Minnow was not going to get wiped out by a storm. I kind of started to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel for me. And I figured, even in anticipation of getting out there, we had about 5 weeks before we had to get out there, that I was just going to approach it in a KISS method, a kind of keep it simple, stupid method that was certainly going to benefit me, and I think, although probably not needed, was going to benefit Roger in the end. The keep it simple, stupid got me going and eventually over the design finish line here. And I had exactly about 4.75 days to research, complete this design and presentation. Now, after that initial Sunday night, Monday rolled around, and boy, was it a Monday. And after our 1-hour tour with Roger, I spent the next 5 hours driving around in that same side-by-side with a brand new roller tape that I had got from a box store. And I drove and I drove and I measured and I measured. And I instantly realized the easiest way for me to keep this project simple was to break this project down. Not do it as its entirety, but rather break it down into areas, and within those areas, zones, and within those zones, individual heads. Now that's not a new concept, but it's a new concept when you're working in a place that you've never been, in a state that you've only touched a couple of times, with unknown resources at your disposal within that town. So you're kind of like taken out of your comfort zone and then expected to perform now that you're there. This was literally like a small 9-hole golf course design project. It really was. I mean, you could have fit a 9-hole golf course on this thing. And with the hills and the valleys and the dam faces and other things that were going to have to be irrigated, that moment came along after measuring. And I love these moments. I don't know about you, but I love aha moments. They are freaking magical. And generally, aha moments come when you're doing something that you have little or no experience at that level, and you figure it out. And that aha moment came about, I would say, noonish on that Monday. It was like a 1,000-pound gorilla just got lifted off my shoulders. I knew exactly what my game plan was going to be at that point, and the rest of the week became pleasurable. Pleasurable to the extent of you want it to be as perfect as you possibly can. You want it to be as accurate as you possibly can. And you want it to be as professional as you possibly can. Now, many of the landscape designs and the irrigation designs that I have done in the past were done on a computer program called Pro Landscape. And although a wonderful product that I had and that I used regularly back then, it did not make sense for this project, because most of the time you would have had to do the project in its entirety. And what I decided to do was break this down into 5 individual designs, and each design sheet would represent one of 5 areas on this property. And that way, when I presented it, I would present it in small doses of 20% of the project at a time, rather than going bam and hitting Roger and his wife with a very large picture that I thought would probably overwhelm and scare the average person off. And Roger's not an average person. He is not intimidated by much in any way, shape, or form. But I didn't want to have these microscopic minutia drawing that would show little dots on a big piece of paper that, yes, it would look very professional, but was it digestible and understandable from the aspect of someone who has not done something like this? So I decided to hand draw it. I jumped back 40 years in my career and pulled out Sharpie pens, colored Sharpie pens, and I went to work with a ruler, a couple of templates, Sharpie pens, and I got on it. I got into it. Monday afternoon, I got into it. And for the next 4 days, with averaging probably about 6 hours a day, I had it done. I had it done, and I had it done to the point where I was happy and proud of the product that I delivered. It had a lot of challenges, a little bit of math, which I'll touch on in a little while. But what I also did, and I think one of the best services that I provided, Roger, was the resources in the industry that were local. I reached out to the company that I used to do a lot of business with, Site One Landscape Products. And they had a local office about 20 miles away from where this job site was. And I reached out and I spoke to the manager there, Neil. And Neil put me in touch with the local Rainbird representative, a guy by the name of James. And also, and more importantly, the Site One contractor manager that worked the area and dealt with nothing but contractors out in the field. And it was wonderful because I had a great conversation with all 3 of these resource contacts. But Mr. John Miller, who said, "Hey, I'm in the area and I can come out and take a look." And he joined me the next morning, the Tuesday morning. And he showed up around 10 o'clock or so. And I then gave him the tour of this 10 acres. And he looked at me and says, "Wow, you got your hands full this week, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And my big questions that I had for him was, does Site One and Rainbird put together a pump for this project that will serve this project and its elevation changes and distances involved? And he said, "Yeah, piece of cake, no problem." And when I looked at him, I was looking at John Miller from the aspect of a residential landscape contractor and not a commercial landscape contractor. He had dealt with and does business with contractors that put in golf courses, parks, ball fields and athletic fields. And it's just another Thursday with this kind of situation. Sans the idea of all the elevation change. But he assured me and showed me probably 3 or 4 options of pumps that would be available that would take care of this project with no problem whatsoever. He even showed me what kind of pressures and distances these pumps were capable of. and how they have these VFDs, these variable frequency drive pumps that ramp up and down depending on what the system is demanding of them at the time. By the time I was done talking with them, shoot, this was going to be not a walk in the park, but certainly a heck of a lot easier now. Not only for me going back to the drawing table, but certainly for Roger later on next year when he actually installs this, because he will have those resources at his disposal, not only for installation if he decided to have that done, but certainly for consultation as he purchases these devices to install. Pumps that are capable of lifting water at 3 and 4 inch pipes great distances without any problem. All you have to do is bring the electricity to him. And he has the electricity and the conduit already in the ground, up and down that dam and at the site of the irrigation pond and down at the lower filling pond, which is a spring-fed, very reliable pond. The other thing that I assured Roger is that you're not going to have to water all these 10 acres all the time. They do get rain, and they certainly won't be doing it in the wintertime, and this system will be winterized when it's installed. So when it is raining, hey, the system goes off, the ponds recharge, everything is golden. But for me, back at the design table, the game plan was simple. What I decided to do was attack each area one at a time on a piece of paper. And I divided them into 5 individual spots. I had areas A1 and A2, which were basically the dam face and the dam top itself. Then I had areas B, C, and D, and those areas were other regions of the property that were going to be irrigated out. So one of the things, if you're not familiar with scale, the ability for me to put down these areas on a architectural D or 24 by 36 piece of paper is scale, and scale that ranged in this particular project. 1 inch equaled 30 feet and 1 inch equaled 40 feet. So you can see the size that I was dealing with and how I had to break that down so that I could get it onto a piece of paper. So 1 inch equals 40 feet, and I barely made those areas onto each piece of paper. But I'll tell you what, as I started in, I was not mistake-free. The very first sheet of paper that I put down in front of me, I made a mistake 5 minutes in. And since I was using pen and not pencil, it was instantly apparent to me that the mistake I made, I had to toss it and I had to start over. Was that a kick in the confidence tank? Yeah, a little bit, but only temporarily. It was something I could get back on that horse very quickly and continue on. And the work week for the next 4.75 days, I sat in Roger's 4-season room that overlooked the ponds and the dam and the pool that was going in and everything that was involved in that. And I just worked, nose to the grindstone. And as I did it, I decided to go alphabetically. So I did zone A1. I did that pretty much Monday afternoon and into Tuesday morning. A2 was Tuesday into early Tuesday afternoon. And then B, area B, which was the largest area, and it involved, wow, probably 4 acres, I would say, 3 acres. 3 acres for sure. And it was the largest area, had the largest number of valves, and certainly the largest number of heads. And then C and D to close out the rest of the week. Having been there, I could really reinforce the decision both Roger and I made that it was not something that I could have ever done remotely. Not in any way, shape, or form. The Google images, both Google Maps and Google Earth, yeah, it didn't do any justice as when you put your feet on the property and you started walking. You couldn't see elevation changes. You couldn't see any of that. So I started dealing in the design with thousands of feet of pipe. Some of this pipe, 3-inch pipe, some of the pipe was 1.5 inches. Some of the pipe got down to 1 inch up around the house and stuff. Thousands of connections eventually, mostly of bushings going from the 3-inch main line to 3-inch laterals out of 3-inch valves, and then downsizing as each zone went away from the valve. I downsized about 1.5 inches. And then at each sprinkler head, it was bushed down to 1 inch. And there you would have a swing arm assembly attached, and the swing arm assembly would attach to the rotor head. So not super complicated once you get your head around it. The one thing that I was designing for this was a 2-wire system, which I have not used. When I got out of the full-time business, I never had a need for a 2-wire system. A 2-wire system is much more simplified electrical side of an irrigation system, but at the same time, it's also complicated as well. So I had to think about that and design that into the project as well. And I did some terminal 2-wire zones, and I did some loops, and everything turned out fine. I decided to make the design 5-sheeted, and each zone was going to be color-coded. So I used colored Sharpie pens. I got one of those packs of, I don't know what they are, 24 or something. And each zone was color-coded, so it was very visual to somebody to look at it. You knew where zone A1A was and zone A1D was. And then that correlated to a booklet that I created and was able to present it in a fashion of a kind of a follow-along. I would have the picture of each area in front of them, and they could follow along by looking at the picture as well as looking at the booklet. So I think it worked out pretty good. I really hope that they understood it by the time we left on Friday evening. I think one of the takeaways that I had was during presentation, I could look at my customers' faces, and I could see, not necessarily in Jolinda's because it's not her bailiwick at all, but I could see in Roger's face, he could understand it. And I could see the digestion process and the comprehension process, that steep curve starting to flatten just a little bit. And he understood by looking at each design sheet that it was accurately represented by what he saw outside. And that made me feel very confident that he was going to be able to take and run with this project when he was ready. So let's talk about parts and pieces and some of the technical stuff that went along with this. You know, when I was contracting in my niche market, which was small to medium-sized residential landscapes, mostly renovations, not new installs, but there were some. My largest was only like a 2-acre parcel. And that was one of my last ones that I did. And that 2-acre parcel also included a 2-acre parcel at Weed Patch Ranch, where Maisto and I used to live. It was a 2-acre parcel, and it was landscaped from street to orchard. So that was about the extent of my irrigation designing. No need for these natural water sources. Everything was well or municipal water. And that makes it easier, not easy, but makes it easier. And in this case, we have huge 2-pump systems, huge natural water source systems. And it was going to involve pipes of like a 4-inch lifting pipe from the lower pond to the upper pond, main lines that were pressure capable, and then 3-inch main lines, thick-walled pipe, PVC pipe, and 3-inch inline valves that had smart solenoids on them for the 2-wire system. The pump involved for the irrigation system directly was going to be one of the larger pumps that Rainbird makes for customers that has a computing device that runs a variable frequency drive pump. They call them VFDs in in the industry. And they're capable of lifting water 20 to 35 feet, which I had here very much so, and also have the capability of filtering out particles out of a natural water source and then self-cleaning the filters as well. And then, not to go total golf course on you, there was at least 3 valves out of this, oh, I think it was 45 or 60. I don't have it in front of me right now. 45 or 60 zones, 3 of them were actual drip systems. And those drip systems were obviously bushed down from high pressure 3-inch pipes down to 1-inch pipes with a pressure regulator on them and a filter and a valve that would take care of areas around the new pool and around the immediate foundation plantings of the house. There was also things that I hadn't dealt with, like grounding rod systems to ground the 2-wire system to make it very electrical storm proof or resistant. That was something that I had not done before. So out of all of it, the parts and pieces, it's, I would say it's just a residential landscape irrigation system on steroids. It's much of the same parts and pieces that you would find in a residential. It's just larger and bigger and more voluminous when it comes to numbers of heads, gallons per minute, pounds per square inch of pressure. And a little bit of math had to go into it only to figure out friction loss and pipe reduction size to keep up the pressure on long runs of each zone. I would have, probably in some cases 300 feet per zone on some of these, like Area B. There were some long runs. And even though I downsized and bushed the pipe down from 3-inch, I only went down to 1.5 inches. And then the terminal ends of those laterals got bushed to 1-inch threaded bushings. And then you put on your swing arm assembly and you put on your rotor. Now the rotors were not your standard residential rotors. There was 2 valves that had standard Rainbird 3500 series rotors up near the business shop and up near the house. The rest of them were large golf course style of rotor heads, and I used the Falcon series, 6500 series from Rainbird. Now, I'm not here in a discussion to compare Rainbird to Hunter and Hunter to Toro and Toro to Rainbird. It's what the customer wanted. It's also a brand that I'm very accustomed to using. So Rainbird it is, at least at this point. In the end, I will say this. I was happy to report all parties were satisfied. Roger felt, for all intent and purposes, that he got his money's worth. And for all intent and purposes, I was able to do this project on site inside of a work week, a Monday through Friday work week, and then be able to fly home. It was quite a change from northern Maine that time of year in October. We came back just to the tail ends of any sort of fall color. We came back to, I think within 24 hours, we had our first snow that was coming down. And the weather that we had out there varied greatly as well. We had 80 plus degree weather. We had one day that was, oh my God, Annie M type of wind. And then we had one afternoon and evening into the night that was an electrical storm from hell. And a lot, I think it was almost 1.5 inches of rain in 4 hours time. I mean, it dumped and it hailed and it blew. So it was quite a selection of Mother Nature doling out her surprises to us. Now, after the presentation was the conversation that Roger and I had, which was kind of a reality check. Now, he is a very intelligent man, and the business that he runs is very successful. It is not, it can be, but it generally is not, because he's automated it, and he also has employees running the business now, where there's not a lot of physical demand. There's a mental demand, but there's not a lot of physical demand. And irrigation work, especially on this scale, is going to be very physically demanding. And Roger's about my age. I think he's a couple years younger. He's in his early 60s. I'm in my mid 60s. And to be able to go out and do this kind of project, certainly solo Lobo, I don't think is a good idea. You could do a lot of trenching, especially the trencher that he plans on using on this job. You could trench all day long from the seat of a ride-on trencher. It's when you have to go back out and clean those trenches and get them prepared to actually put pipe down in. And the constant ups and downs of climbing in and out of a trench and shoveling and doing that kind of stuff. An older body, with just a few exceptions in the human world, has a hard time doing it at our age. And I really cautioned Roger about, making sure that you do have some help, even if you have to hire it for day labor or whatever, to clean these trenches and to be able to reach out to some of the resources that I gave him in the industry to come out and consult with him before and during the project. And as long as he gets off on the right foot and doesn't become overwhelmed, I think Roger's going to be very successful in the installation of this. Will I be back out there again? I would say maybe. I don't know. I'll probably talk with him on several occasions before and during the project, but for the most part, very capable guy. It's just the physical demand. As for me, I was happy with the outcome and the approach that I made to the scale of this project. Initially, yeah, I had the willies. I did. I'm not afraid to admit it. And couple that with the hotel lodging situation, it made it a stressful beginning to the week. But Maestro and I conquered that as well. And hey, I'm proud of us for pulling that off. So, the design service is available to you as part of the Yard Coach system. It can be on-site or remote. It can be just consulting, or it could be some drawing. So if you're in a position where you think I might be able to help you, feel free to reach out. youryardcoach@gmail.com. Check out the website, youryardcoach.com, and check out what we have there. If I cannot do something for you service-wise, I may have some recommendations or resources that I can steer you in the right direction. So there you go. What do you think about a project that size? When you see something like that on paper, it just does not translate into an actual visual effect of what I've dealt with here over the past 4.5 days. It's been quite a challenge, a lot of learning curve in some instances, but as a result of that learning curve, my confidence has really been bolstered, and I think the client will have later on today, on Friday, will have the confidence to take it on as well. Hey, if you got any questions regarding a large-scale irrigation or landscape design, make sure you email me, youryardcoach@gmail.com. Maybe I can coach you through it a little bit, or you can look at hiring this old codger to come out and visit you. In any case, I sure do appreciate your time. If you stuck around this long, I'd really appreciate a like and a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. Very informative, very, very informative, and I hope I answer all your questions throughout each and every episode. Guys, I'll catch you next week. I appreciate your time. As always, to your landscape success. See you next week.